Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Chloe Driver killed her daughter. She admits it, everyone acknowledges it, but she says that she is not guilty by reason of insanity. Tonight, we have the perfect guest to help us answer some of our questions around that. Dr. Patrice Berry founded Four Rivers Psychological Services, and she addresses emotional, cognitive, behavioral needs of children, of teens, of families, and also of adults in the Fredericksburg, Virginia area. She offers therapy, psychological testing, coaching, and public speaking and group trainings, plus psychological services. She also does teletherapy and online counseling to people in Virginia, and she does online coaching worldwide for both individuals and businesses. So she's a licensed clinical psychologist, and fortunately for us, she has a YouTube channel where she breaks down the psychological aspects of legal cases. She particularly focuses on trials, which makes her absolutely perfect for what we're going to do tonight, which is talk about the Chloe Driver case and her claim that she is not guilty by reason of insanity. So welcome, Dr. Berry. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Dr. Berry, I know that you have been following the case as well, and you have already done posts on this and talked about the case and talked about her psychological claims as well as the testing that's been done. So, what I thought we'd do tonight is go over Dr. McClendon Garrett, a forensic psychologist who testified at the trial. And I know you've delved into her work. I wanted to focus the two of us together on her statements and how they relate to the claim of not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, my last video I did on the legal aspects of what that means, what the claim is, and how you can use that, how it gets used in the course of a case. So I thought it'd be especially great to look at it together, and I would love to have your insights on this.
All right.
So and I do need to give a shout out to the first five in the chat tonight: Gloria, Chris, Shy Gal, Carol Sue, and our kid. Thank you all for being here early and commenting. Thank you for doing that. All right, well, let's get started. I know that Dr. Berry has about an hour, so we're gonna, I've made it intentionally pretty short as far as our clips go, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for questions, but we don't have too long tonight, so we'll be about an hour. All right, so let's, hopefully this will work. Let's see. And I'll count on everybody to let me know if it.
And why was that?
I think there's sort of a confluence of events. I think she started to feel worse. She suggested that she was starting to sort of question some of the things that she was being taught, and started to feel a little bit paranoid and was starting to experience those delusions of references. She was starting to see things and making them think that she needed to hurt herself, that she wasn't supposed to be in the universe, she wasn't supposed to be in the world. And
so, as always, I get super excited when we first get started. Yeah. No intro, just right into the case, as if everyone knew exactly what we were talking about. So my bad on that. Chloe Driver is accused of murdering her daughter. Her daughter was just a little baby, just 13 months old. And the question is why she would do such an insane thing. And I use insane very loosely, not in the legal sense. But the big question for the jury is going to be whether she was insane legally. Because if she was, under Georgia law where she is being tried, she may be found not guilty, even though it was a heinous, horrendous crime in every regard. If she did not know the difference between right and wrong at the time she committed the murder, then she can be found not guilty under Georgia law. It's very rare for a jury to find that because it's such a high threshold, high standard. Another possible standard is if she was overcome by delusions that took away her will. And so she wasn't able to do what she believed to be the right thing. So that's the issue here. And it's a very high standard. And the question is, what is the jury going to do with that? So with that intro that I should have given before, let me go ahead and let her talk a little more.
That she reached out to her family, the family she was living with, and wasn't able to get help and was instead given CBD oil. And that once she started taking the CBD oil, that there was a big jump. She felt like it was very potent. That's how she felt. And that her paranoia and delusions of reference and magical thinking all increased sort of significantly and sharply after starting to take that.
So I want to divide that into two parts, if we could, Dr. Berry.
Yeah.
One is the whole issue of the CBD, because in fact, as it turns out, she did not test positive for any kind of presence of any of that in her system. And so I'm trying to be very careful with my word choice.
Yes.
So my apologies.
No, you're good. And the interesting thing about, CBD sometimes does not include the use disorder that she was diagnosed with. So some people use that oil. It has the relaxation component without the substance, without the substance part. Yes.
Okay.
In my state, the substance is legal, but CBD, it does not include the THC.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit too about the delusions of references that she's talking about. Tell us a little bit more about what she's talking about and how that relates to Chloe Driver and her claims.
And so delusions of reference are this phenomenon where the person believes that someone is communicating with them, or that they might have this neutral thing that happens and they automatically think that it's about them. Today, there was some additional testimony that she thought that she caused COVID because it starts with a C and her last name starts with a D. And so there were situations like that, these neutral events would happen and that she would think they related directly to her. That is what she's claiming.
Okay. Now, the next thing that the doctor we're watching is going to talk about is some of her diagnoses. And I'm really curious about your take on these and on how they relate to her claims that she was insane at the time of the murder. Like, could they even conceivably relate to this? And I should mention that the doctor who's testifying is not a paid expert for the defense solely. She actually works for the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability. So she is a neutral witness, which is unusual in a case. Let me go ahead and play a little more.
What ultimately did you diagnose Ms. Driver with in this case?
Schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and the yes.
And we talked a little bit about that. So let's focus more directly on the schizoaffective disorder. What is that? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Schizoaffective disorder is, a lot of people know about schizophrenia. So it's schizophrenia plus mood. Schizophrenia is when somebody has thoughts that are different than other people. Or perceptions that are different from other people. So they may see things that aren't really there, or they may hear things that when there's nothing to hear. They may smell things that aren't there. They may feel things walking on their skin or feel things in their body. So those are hallucinations. They may have delusions, which are fixed false beliefs that persist even in the face of contrary evidence. It's when there's really no other explanation for their belief other than that they have a mental illness. So a lot of times it takes people are out to get me, people are out to harm me, or I have special powers. I can fly, I can see things, I'm smarter than everybody else. Plus you also get disorganized thinking. So they may change subjects without any indication of why. So when it's schizoaffective disorder, you've got the hallucinations, delusions, and thought disorder, plus problems with your mood, depression, mania, and sometimes both. Sometimes they go back and forth. Sometimes it's just one or the other.
And what about the borderline personality disorder? How does that play in?
Borderline personality disorder is sort of a lifetime thing. It's characterological. Oftentimes it's triggered by some sort of trauma or some sort of feeling of abandonment in early childhood, but it's a pattern of behavior that starts in and continues throughout their life. And it involves things like unstable relationships. So she talked.
So let me stop right there and let's kind of break that down into components. And I want to start with the substance disorder because that one seems to me to be irrelevant,
Yes.
legally speaking. And the reason I say that is because legally, you're still responsible for your actions if you're under the influence of something. So I wanted to get your opinion about that.
And when she was at the hospital, she tested negative. And so this expert wasn't aware that she was not under the influence of anything at the time of the offense. They did a drug panel. So that happens at the ER, especially for a situation for what she did to herself. They would do a screening just to make sure that there weren't any other medications, that just to check all those levels of where things are.
So what about the borderline personality disorder? Because to me, a personality disorder seems to me too, that might never meet the legal criteria for, but I want to know, I mean, could a personality disorder cause a crime like this?
I know the one that definitely can't meet criteria is antisocial personality disorder. And that's the one where people are against social norms. It's not antisocial, meaning I don't want to go out in public. It's more this against social norms. Often there's a long history of involvement with the court system. But with borderline personality disorder, you would normally need some type of psychosis or something on top of that diagnosis to meet criteria for not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay. And so now let's talk about the schizoaffective disorder, which seems to me the one that most is closest to the criteria for possibly being a legal excuse. Tell me a little bit more about that and as it relates to Chloe Driver.
With schizoaffective disorder. And when I heard some testimony about her behavior, the first diagnosis that came to my mind was potentially bipolar disorder. And there can be bipolar disorder with psychotic features, but schizoaffective is they meet criteria for both schizophrenia, and then they also meet criteria for bipolar disorder. And sometimes their mood might be more stable, but they're still having psychosis. Because with a bipolar disorder with psychotic features, normally the psychosis and mood would go together. With schizoaffective disorder, it's separate. It's schizophrenia plus a mood disorder. So she did a good job explaining this. I thought this expert did a much better job just clearly articulating things for the jury. And I think she came across in a credible way. The prosecution really went at the expert from today. And if people have time to go back and watch the expert from today, because it was she didn't do as clear of a job communicating these things, I think, than versus this expert.
Yeah, she was an excellent expert. She's an attorney too,
Yes.
by training. She initially practiced for a number of years and then went back to school and became a forensic psychologist. So a glutton for schooling. She definitely did a lot. But I agree. I thought she was a fantastic witness. And just full disclosure, I'm a full day behind because getting these clips together for our talk tonight, I'm a full day behind. So I've got to catch up. I'll have to watch the witness that you mentioned.
Please. So because today it was Chloe's mother.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah. It was today was definitely interesting.
Yeah, that was very intense, very intense. And obviously for Chloe as well, who was just dissolved in tears. So with the schizoaffective disorder, what are the features of that would lend themselves to a crime? Like how would that connect?
So where the law and psychology interject, it's that the person's delusion. I think what this expert is trying to say is that because she mentioned delusional compulsion, and that's where I think she was going. I don't know that part of the legal definition, I don't know that how clear that was for the jury. And it did seem like this expert was saying that in the moment, Chloe didn't fully understand that her actions were wrong, despite the writings that she did after, or despite some of the statements that she's made. And that would be the break from reality. But a person can be psychotic and still be legally responsible. They can be psychotic and still understand that they shouldn't do this thing. I do think that the defense has an uphill battle, because I think the jury is going to look at the fact that Chloe continues to communicate with Z. And I don't know how the jury is going to really feel about all of that.
And to clarify for folks
Yes.
who are tuning in, Z is the relationship that Chloe was in. It was actually her husband, but he had gone on to marry, or at least strike up a relationship with 2 other women who also lived with them. So there were now the 3 of them plus the 4 of them, the 3 women. Z, that was his nickname or religious name that they gave him. And then Chloe and Z had a daughter. It was that daughter that Chloe killed. And she is the one, the subject of the case, the subject of the murder. So yes, that was a huge point, that she continued to have contact with Z. And we'll get to that in just a minute, but I'm very interested in your thoughts on that, because obviously the prosecution thinks that that means she can't really be all that afraid of him. He can't have had that much control over her. After all, she's still pursuing him.
And that's where I think 2 things can be true at the same time. And talking about coercive control and trauma bonds, talking about some of those things can help people understand how she can still try to be so connected with him. And individuals with borderline personality disorder have a severe fear of abandonment and rejection. And some of the delusions of non-bizarre delusions can occur within borderline personality disorder. So a non-bizarre delusion would be, I think all the women are talking bad about me, but they might not be. Or there can be some of those non-bizarre delusions that happen that can be a feature of borderline personality disorder.
Okay, we'll listen a little more.
Generally about paranoia, that everybody was ganging up against her. Everybody is talking about her. Everybody is out to get her in some way. She talked about, on sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, sort of a grandiose delusion that she had special powers and special skills. And that started back when she was a teen, with believing that she could read minds and that people could read her mind and things like that. It continued with this sort of magical thinking, that things that she did could impact the world. So if she, walked the right way, talked the right way, breathed the right way, then it would be good for the world. If she walked the wrong way, breathed the wrong way, talked the wrong way, that it could be bad for the world.
So let's talk about that for just a minute. The paranoia ranging all the way to grandiose delusions. Do you have a sense of where she was in that range when the murder occurred?
So I think this expert is thinking that she was at the most extreme, that she was not able to think clearly or rationally, because to all of us watching, we're all like, she had $65,000 in a bank account. She had transferred $60,000 to her. Like, all of us are saying, like, she had so many ways out. And this expert is presenting it as though in that moment, she saw the thing that she used, and she saw that as a sign to do the thing that she did. And I don't know where the jury is going to sit with that. I'm still listening to it, and I'm still, I haven't formed an opinion of, like, because the defense experts are talking. I want to hear the rebuttal presentation as well, because I'm guessing the state has somebody on their side that's going to say that she did know that it was wrong. And I think the state is going to have somebody that has a different perspective. And we're going to leave this up to the jury to decide if this meets the legal requirement.
Right. And the next little clip is what I thought was one of the saddest little pieces of the story.
She believed that she was downloading her sins or the bad parts about her into her child through breastfeeding. She also talked about pouring her sin into the child. And I believe there was a statement report from Mr. Benyamin to the police that was described in the investigative report that she called Hannah, that Hannah was no longer her child, but was a sin. And so there was a lot of evidence that she really believed that by having a child with somebody who was married, by having a child in this sort of open relationship, that it was a sin, and that she passed that sin on to her daughter. And so they shared that they were both embodiments of sin.
That is tragic to me. I mean, that is so, so sad. And I have a question about that issue, because a lot of that could go back, and this witness talks about it's hard to parse out what belongs to the cult that she was a member of, what she was taught as part of that cult from Z himself, and what was something that was unique to her and created by her mental issues. So my question is, if Benjamin is teaching this, what is his responsibility in this? And he's also keeping her from getting treatment. Let's add that.
So literally like an hour ago, testimony came out that from his first wife saying that he may actually have schizoaffective disorder, and a lot of his bizarre beliefs and things. And so I am sitting back watching this, and her thinking that her daughter is sin, and that because I guess they had a nickname for her, so that Nimsy nickname meant sin, but that's what Z gave her, and that came out from the expert today. And so that's where the the defense is gonna have to clarify to the jury what goes beyond the belief of this group, and then what was truly coming from Chloe, because I still have some question marks there of, was this actually a belief from the group? This expert didn't seem to push back and ask as many questions based on some of the cross-examination, because if I was sitting with Chloe doing some type of evaluation, and I am not a forensic expert, so I'm a clinical psychologist, I don't do forensic work, I would have wanted to understand the dynamics between the other people in the home. And this expert really didn't get that. And the prosecution is saying that's the thing. So the prosecution is saying she wanted just the baby, and she just wanted it to be the three of them with Z. And the defense is saying, no, she was paranoid, she was psychotic, she was delusional. That's what the defense is saying.
So I understand your point, and I think that they would agree. The way the case has been set up is they're trying to make a distinction between what the cult believed and what she believed because of her delusion. But I would say this: if more than one person in this really tiny cult of a total of 4 people with kind of the onlooker, what was his name? James? Was it James?
Jason.
Jason. With Jason. So you could kind of make it 5. If even some of them have this same delusion, it may not be religious. It may be shared delusion related to mental illness, particularly if we now have some testimony that maybe one other member had that. So to me, that actually might end up helping the defense, because it suggests that religious beliefs are not. They're shared mental disease-induced delusions. What do you think about that concept?
It really could be. And I think the defense is really trying to put it that Chloe is the one, that she's the one that went further than even the group went, that her thoughts, her delusions went further than the group. And I understood why the prosecution called Jason, because his beliefs were so far. Like he was, if it was really extreme, and the defense is saying that her beliefs went even further.
I think the prosecution had to call him because they
Yes.
needed to lay the predicate facts for what had happened. They needed to be able to say, here's where he was, here's where the baby was, here's where Chloe was, and they didn't want to call Z. That was my thought, and so they had no choice. He was the least likely to horrify the jury, and even so, I imagine will manage to horrify the jury. I think he did our folks when I played the clips on Friday.
It was wow.
It was wild. So, all right. Well, let's listen to a little bit more.
She told me she tried to leave multiple times. My understanding from the things that Ms. Driver told me was that she was incredibly isolated from everybody outside of the little family that they made, that she was not allowed to speak to other people unless they were trying to recruit them, that she wasn't allowed to go into stores or spend money or use a phone without being supervised.
Let's stop there for a second, because I want to talk about that isolation as a component and what that might do to someone with a mental illness. And then I also want to talk about the fact that that's somewhat a characteristic often of people in cults, and therefore could be a shared belief that's non-delusional. So just give me your thoughts, if you would, Dr. Berry.
And so isolation is something that's used by every high demand, high control cult-like group. So, because isolating, it cuts people off from other options, because if they can communicate with other people, if other people do see what's going on, then there can be these outside influences. And I think Benjamin, I think he wanted to be the main voice in her ear and wanted to control the people around her. And for somebody that is experiencing a mental health crisis, because this group did not believe in modern medicine, they did not believe in taking medication or getting therapy, and some of their practices could have actually made things worse for her.
And really, that's even one of the things I was getting to when we talked a minute ago about what Z's responsibility is. Could he be criminally liable because of withholding medication? I don't actually think so, but I was curious if you had any thoughts.
Some states are starting, because he knew she needed help and he didn't get it for her. I think the state, it would have been a hard case. It would have been a hard case, I think, because it's taken 4 years for them to get to trial for Chloe. And I think the state probably wanted him to cooperate against her.
Mm-hmm.
I think she had a black eye at the time of her arrest. And if she had said what happened to her, I think he could have been arrested at minimum for the harm to her, or wherever they had the baby and left against medical advice, that maybe that could have been something. Like, it sounds like it could be child neglect, but when things get to this point, they normally just focus on the main person, and they don't always press charges against the other people that I think could have could have stepped in and helped Hannah.
Right. Clearly there were indications that she was deteriorating and that her mental condition was very fragile, if not bad, by that point.
Yeah.
I mean, they even mentioned she ran out in traffic and other things. It would be clear warning signs that somebody is having trouble. But I think the problem with holding somebody liable for that is then you're making everybody around medical professionals who are responsible for knowing exactly when someone needs help and what help they need, and responsible for getting it for them. So I think legally it would be tough to hold Z responsible unless he had some kind of involvement in the actual act of harming. So that in that case, maybe there would have been some issue. All right, well, the next is one of the more bizarre parts, I think. So let's hear what she has to say about that.
And then she also started to talk about some delusional thoughts she had about photographs and people taking photographs so that they could download you back into that point in time, and that sort of it would create. And this is something I've heard from other people as well. This is not as unusual as it might sound, but that by taking a photograph of somebody, you sort of create, I don't know, like anybody back up their hard drives and you create a picture of what happened at that time. So if anything goes wrong, you can go back to that. That's sort of what she was describing, that by taking a picture, he could then, if she died, download her back into that same spot, which she found to be very distressing.
So to me, that definitely is unique to Chloe. It doesn't seem like any kind of religious belief. It seems like some mental problem she personally is having. But I also don't see how it relates to the murder. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Unless she thought that they would be able to download them back, or I don't know. I think this was just another example of just how she was decompensating mentally and just some of these bizarre beliefs. Because this expert said that before Chloe ever met Z, that she had some delusional thinking, that some of this was present even before she met him.
Right. I need to say a few thank yous. Bama Queen has been a member for 9 months. That's fantastic. That's as long as we've had members. So that's awesome. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. I appreciate 2 from Michael. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Well, let's keep going with the next section. She's going to be talking about that very thing we started to talk about earlier, which is that ongoing relationship with Z. She did not want to let that go, even though they had been through all of this. And even though she claims, her defense team does, that she was basically kept captive by him, that several terrible, I don't even know the right word for punishments, I guess, were inflicted on her. And that came from him. And that hurt her mentally. That hurt her mental status. And yet, let's hear what she said.
And she told you all kinds of things about her relationship with Benjamin Ben Michael and how abusive and oppressive it was, right?
She gave me a lot of information.
Did she ever tell you in your 4 hours together that she was still actively communicating with him on hundreds of jail phone calls? And
so tell me a little bit about your thoughts around that.
I think she might not know who she is without him. He's described as her first real relationship, and she may experience their relationship as love. I see it as a trauma bond. And what I mean by a trauma bond is this unhealthy connection and attachment where it's very codependent, and she might rely on him for her sense of self, for her sense of worth, because it's so the jail calls came up with today's expert, and she mentioned that he would be nice to her if she was saying the things he wanted her to say. If she was saying the right things. But the minute she started saying something that he didn't agree with, he would start to get like controlling and demeaning. And then she would say, "Yes, daddy." And she calls him daddy. Like she would say, and that she would flip back into this more submissive role. And not submissive, but like not a healthy, like this is a controlling, the power dynamic in this relationship is way off. And so I work with a lot of individuals that have borderline personality disorder. It's a very treatable condition. We use dialectical behavior therapy skills. We use boundaries, because often individuals with that diagnosis, they struggle with like, where do I end and the other person begin? And so she might see him as part of her, and that she might not want to live without him. So his first wife talked about that when she would leave him, she would think about, not wanting to be here anymore. And she has no mental health conditions, but that's the type of control that he had over her. And I think the defense is doing a good job presenting some of that information, that even in a healthy person, this is what, like this individual really struggled. Now, she didn't hurt her child, but with somebody who was, mentally fragile, she completely fell apart under his control. I think if she got out, I think she would go back. And that's kind of scary for me, And I don't know what the jury's gonna do with that.
And she was just 17, I think it was, when they met, and he was more than double her age, which is obviously going to create, I mean, the fact that she calls him daddy sort of indicates their relationship in terms of age, if no other way, and is pretty disturbing. So, one of the things that is, I think, significant about the fact that she keeps going back to him or continued with that is that it undermines her argument that he had taken away her will and that she didn't have her own will. But I also think it's kind of part of that borderline personality disorder, isn't it? To chase after the person as soon as they are no longer interested, then you chase after them because the rejection isn't something they can handle.
And even within a healthier relationship, there can be this pursuer distancer thing that happens in relationships. But when you add in borderline personality disorder, it can be, I love you, I hate you. I hate you, don't leave me. It can be this extreme. It's this black or white, all or nothing relationship. And I don't know that she would ever completely cut him off. And it sounds like the jail tried. The jail tried to block numbers, and the prosecution's doing a good job pointing out the fact that she has to call him. He, like, if someone's in a jail, they can't receive calls. She has to make those calls. And in the defense that they're going for, I'm sure her team probably said, please, like, I'm sure her team probably wanted her to cut off contact. I don't know if she can. And that breaks my heart. And I don't know if the jury will do the not guilty but mentally ill. Guilty but mentally ill versus the complete in GRI. I don't know what the jury will decide.
It's far more likely. It's also a lot less useful for Chloe, a lot less impact in terms of legally what difference it makes for her. Yeah. But it's far more likely because people want to say guilty. I mean, she did it, right? She admits she did it. It's hard to say not guilty. That's a difficult mental gymnastic to perform, not guilty because it's hard.
And do you know in Georgia, can they get mental health treatment? Because it's my understanding. So I researched it for Nevada. I didn't research it for Georgia because in some states, the individual can get ordered to mental health treatment first and then a jail sentence. Is that the same in Georgia? If you know, and it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, that is what the statute talks about. The statute talks about the fact that, but it's the Department of Corrections that makes the choice. Okay. And it specifically says in the statute that it's dependent on their funding and if they have enough. So in other words, if they don't have the funding, they can just say too bad and then you don't get anything. But you could, in theory, be sent somewhere else first before you are returned to the prison. But she doesn't seem to be in any kind of dire circumstance now. So frankly, that doesn't seem very likely. She is now getting medication and taking medication. So it doesn't seem like that would be something they would choose.
And that's where I hope her lawyers advocate for therapy, because a personality disorder, there's no medication for a personality disorder. Like, she needs therapy. That's my own personal thought, that if she didn't get the appropriate treatment, rehab for her is going to be very, very difficult.
And if the attorneys do advocate, the judge is probably going to tell them, I'm not over that. Yeah. That's not my choice. It's the Department of Corrections. And the attorneys don't really have a set role there where they can ask for particular things. So I think that'll be an uphill battle. If she is found under that part of the statute instead of not guilty, then I think it will be an uphill battle for her to get any more treatment than she's presently getting, which may be enough. She definitely seems to be in a better circumstance. So, all right.
As part of your forensic evaluation process, is it typical for the evaluators to tell the defendant what the possible options and outcomes are for each? For example, would you explain to her the concept of not guilty by reason of insanity and what would have to be found in order for her to avail herself of that defense?
Yes.
Okay. And that's typical, right?
It is.
Explain that to them?
It is.
And so I have a question. Why is that from a psychologist standpoint? Why is it important to tell them that?
So, and I think she was specifically talking about competency evaluations because I think she did this during the competency evaluation part first, because Chloe was evaluated to determine if she was competent to stand trial, meaning, did she understand who the judge is and that she needs to work with her lawyers? And does she understand the charges against her? And you would typically go over the different plea options. Like, did she understand the difference between the different plea options?
Okay. I know we're up against time, so I want to go ahead and go through the
Yes.
3 things that I think were the most important, and in terms of her statement.
Are you aware that one of her first inquiries while in the hospital was, how long will my prison sentence be for killing her?
I have heard that.
Is that consistent with her statements to you about her ability to distinguish between right and wrong?
It certainly reflects an ability to distinguish between what's legal and not legal.
Okay.
There's a little bit more gray area when you talk about right and wrong on a more ethical, moral appropriateness level.
Okay, but we're talking about the law.
Now, I don't agree with her on that. I just want to throw that in. We're talking that what the psychologist just said is exactly what we're talking about. The law is that it's whether she could determine the difference between right and wrong in the course of committing this act. So, but let me go ahead and play another couple, and I'll get you to react to both of these together.
Yes.
She did state to me that she knew that it was wrong, but she also stated, I was at peace because it's how it's supposed to be.
Okay.
So this, again, both sides of that coin. Yes, she appeared to understand the legal wrongfulness, but there is some question about the moral and appropriateness in her
Okay.
mind.
Are you aware that she told Dr. Ballard, as soon as it happened, I regretted it. I thought I shouldn't have done this. This was not supposed to happen. Are you aware that when she was discussing whether she knew her actions were wrong, she also volunteered that she locked the door so that she could also stab herself in the throat and make sure that she died?
Yes.
Isn't it true that she
Let's
told
stop
you
right
that
there.
she apologized?
Sorry.
Mhm.
So, talk me through those particular kinds of facts and the question of knowing the difference between right and wrong as the legal standard.
I think this expert is looking at some of her religious delusions, and she didn't call them that, but that there was this, her feeling like she had to do it. And I'm with you. I don't completely agree. Like, it seems like she understood that she wasn't supposed to do this, and she's taking steps to make sure that she's not stopped. And in a lot of cases, that's been enough to prove, yes, like some consciousness of guilt, or yes, the person did understand that what they were doing was wrong. And but this expert is kind of saying that she felt like she had to. And so I don't know if that's that delusional compulsion. So that's where I listened to all of this and it wasn't completely clear to me. So I'm thinking about what the jury, because I understand psychology, I understand the different diagnoses and everything. And I still had question marks of, wait a minute, wouldn't that show that she did understand? And because it wasn't even the difference of in that moment, because her statement in the hospital is after the fact. That's outside of the incident, outside of that moment. And I still had question marks with this one.
Right. And I do think for each of these, those are to me, the most important fact of all is the lock the door, because it's in the moment and it's right when it happened. And the reason that she would do that, and she even admitted it, was because people might try to stop her from what she was doing because they would disagree. Now, the expert is right. I think that it could be that she just thinks they're all wrong. They just all have an incorrect idea about right and wrong. And her idea of right and wrong is correct, and her idea is obviously not in agreement with them, but that doesn't mean they're right. But it's a very telling fact that she thought others would find that to be inappropriate, and they would try to stop her.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
She indicated that she had come from the 12 tribes meeting where she had believed that they were talking about death to give her a specific message that now was the time to do this thing that she'd been getting messages about to herself and her daughter, and that they got to the location, and that when she went to go join the other two wives in one room, that Mr. Joyce like snapped at her and said, no, go to, she called it Brett's room. I believe Brett was somebody who previously lived there or previously traveled with him. So she told me that she interpreted that instruction as an instruction that she herself and her daughter. She indicated that she was trying to do some research on her phone about how to get away, how to escape and move money and things like that. And that she went to try and change her daughter's diaper and didn't have a diaper and asked for one to be brought to her, and somebody threw her a dirty shirt instead. And that she interpreted that giving her a dirty shirt instead of a diaper as a statement to her that she's not worthy of this world and she needs to leave this world. She's not even worth a clean shirt.
So this seems pretty important to me. I am really interested in your take on this whole story about the shirt, about what caused her to suddenly snap, as she states.
And the expert is leaning into the bipolar disorder and the psychosis. The way that I've heard some of the testimony in this case, it sounded more like she wanted to escape and didn't see a different way out. And so this is where, and I'm listening to this, trying to think how the jury might apply this. This was difficult because an individual with borderline personality disorder could also misinterpret a situation like this to mean you don't care. You won't even get me a dirty diaper. I'm worthless. I might as well. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that they didn't understand that it was wrong. And I think the prosecution is going to go hard on, is that the thing? And she's going to say it's all of these things. It wasn't that one thing, that it wasn't this one thing that made it. It was all of the other neutral messages that she had been interpreted that this is what she had to do. That's what this expert is saying.
Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead. I want us to have a little bit of time for questions. So I think what I'm going to do is pull us back into this. The one thing I wanted to ask you about, there was a video of Chloe Driver in the hospital. She was unable to talk because, of course, of her own injuries, but she was writing messages, and a nurse, I suppose, was going back and forth with the notes that she was writing, and on the phone with Z, talking for her. So she would read the notes, also making comments of her own, like, it seems to me like.
So that was the detective.
Oh, it was the detective. Okay. Yeah. Dressed in scrubs, though.
Maybe it wasn't. So I saw one where it was the detective. Maybe there was more than one phone call.
There may have been one. The one I was looking at, it was a woman dressed in scrubs. And so, but making comments of her own, like, seems to me like you were threatening her and things like that. And she hangs up the phone and she says, I have a few questions too. I was like, wow, that's really intense questioning from your medical professionals. But there was a comment in there about threats that he had made and statements he had made about the baby and statements that he had made about her. And I wanted to get your thoughts about what that means in terms of her mental state.
And it came out today that she had met the first wife and the first baby. They had went on a trip together, and that's the one that got away. And Z, because that first wife claims that Z threatened to run off with the child. She's currently trying to work on having her current husband legally adopt, her and Z's child. And because once she left, she took her child, he has had minimal contact with his, and so they're calling it like a parental alienate, like that he's has no contact with his child. I think he probably threatened, after losing a wife and a child this way, I think he would have let Chloe go knowing that she would probably come back, but I don't think he would have ever let her take their child, because he's a cult leader trying to grow his cult by having children. And I think that's an important thing. And I think
Yeah.
he viewed her and the baby as property. And I don't know him. I haven't heard him say this. The way Jason talked about it, to me, the women and the child, Hannah, was objectified almost as these external things and not people with their own rights, thoughts, beliefs. And
Mhm.
that can happen in those types of high control groups.
Right. Well, let's go ahead. If you
Mhm.
have questions for Dr. Berry, be sure to put question marks at the very beginning of your question. That'll help me spot it in the chat. But go ahead and put those in, and she and I can keep talking a little bit. But as you think of your questions and what you want to ask, and Mama Pinks is telling everybody to put their questions. So here's one from Rosie, talking about the case hinging on Chloe's pre-cult mental health and whether or not this was a long time coming, no matter the circumstances, or did meeting Z, did the wives spark everything? Can you see that?
I can, yeah.
You can. Okay, I didn't know if you could see
Yep.
the way we're set up, if you could see it. Do you have some
And
thoughts on that, Dr.
I
Berry?
think being in this group that didn't believe in mental health treatment, and he would threaten her like, "Hey, if you don't stop, I'm going to send you to a mental health hospital." And I think at one point she was like, "Okay," and he was like, and he wouldn't do it. And that was, I think, according to Jason. And um I think in this group, I can see her definitely getting worse. And um and I think he limited her contact with the outside world. I do. I'm not sure where the jury is going to fall on her criminal responsibility for her act. I don't know.
Mhm. Okay, let me see. Scar Motley and me asks that he can see where many people can't or don't want to understand mental illness. What questions would you ask in voir dire to get open-minded jurors? That's a really good question.
Wow.
That is a very good question, Scar Motley and me.
If they knew, so going in, because they already had the experts' reports, I would ask if they had a family member with a personality disorder. The same thing happened in the Sarah Boone trial, because they knew narcissism was going to come up. And if somebody said yes, you might ask about the specific one. And if somebody had really negative thoughts, really negative beliefs about borderline personality, so borderline personality disorder is one of the most stigmatized mental health illness, like mental health diagnoses there are, because sometimes therapists will be biased towards that particular diagnosis. And what I mean by that is if somebody calls and is like, "Oh, I have borderline personality disorder. Do you have any openings?" I, as a therapist, might have them in my mind like, "Oh, this person's going to be in crisis all the time. They're not going to have any boundaries." Like sometimes there can be bias that comes with that particular diagnoses. And so when I do psychological assessments and somebody has these types of traits or this diagnosis, or I get one of those calls and I am full and I can't take them, I instead recommend that they say, ask a therapist if they have history with people with severe emotional dysregulation. How do you work with clients with severe emotional dysregulation? That you don't say that diagnosis on the phone, because there can be a lot of stigma with that particular diagnosis.
Hmm. So, and I'll throw this in, Scar Motley and me too. One key would be to ask your question to find out whether they have an opinion or any knowledge about, and then make sure they get split off for your additional questioning so that they don't then poison the pool, as it's called. So here's a question from Beverly Parker about whether Chloe has a developmental disability and was she in special education?
They describe her as being defiant, and it sounds like there were issues in childhood. Her mom described today that she was kind of overwhelmed because I think Chloe's dad traveled, and sometimes it would just be mom with the 3 boys. And the mom described her oldest son as being very, like, she described him in kind of a negative way, I thought. Did you
I thought
see
so
that
too. Yes, I
testimony?
did, and I thought it was pretty negative.
And
So,
and that she wondered if Chloe had learned some of her behavior from him. Chloe is the youngest, and Chloe would she would ask her mom, because at 15 years old, 15 or 16, she got permission to go and live with her boyfriend, with some other boy. The mother says that she did not know that she was in the relationship with the older with Z. But it does not sound like she was in special education, or that did not come up.
Yeah,
Her
that was how I
intellect, her
heard it too.
intelligence didn't come up.
So I have a question
Mhm.
about I was intrigued when they showed the note that she was writing and that the nurse slash detective, whoever it was reading to Z over the phone. And it looked, although she had extremely large handwriting and it was sort of looped around the page, it was coherent, especially given she was just writing, a phrase or a sentence to respond. So it seemed pretty coherent. It seemed different from what we were told in the Richard Allen trial that just concluded about his psychotic features and what we would look for in a note he would write around the time that he actually had psychosis. So does the way she wrote suggest she was not in psychosis at the time when she was in the hospital just following the murder?
And what the doctors talked about, the psychologists, they both mentioned the fact that she was heavily medicated, like she was on pain medications at the time, which shouldn't impact psychosis, but there was no evidence of any psychosis, because of any psychosis at the hospital.
So Avalon asks a question: what resources are available to help people in situations like Chloe's? Good question.
Really great question.
Yeah.
And it sounds like Chloe's mother was trying to get a birth certificate for Hannah. You check with your local area to see if there are any shelters, because often shelters they'll have unlisted places where people can go, especially women and children. It's normally easiest to find housing for women in these types of situations. It does sound like the relationship with Z was not safe at all, and her black eye, I think, is really troubling. And I think being able to find resources like that, your local social services. The hard thing is that it's hard to leave a relationship like that, because the minute someone leaves, they often go back. I think the average is somewhere between 6 to 7 times for somebody to finally say, I'm not going back.
So I think there may have been 2 black eyes, also 2 separate ones. The reason I say that is one was 10 days before the murder. And then when she's in the hospital, the nurse slash detective leans over and says to Z, she's got a black eye. And that's a long time for a black eye to last, for it still to be visible 10 days later. I mean, it's possible, but I wondered if this was another incident. In any event, there may have been 2. That's a possibility. Mary Ellen wants to know if Z is in jail now, or if we know about the other wives. One testified today, and so we know about one. We don't know about the 2 wives who are presently with him, though.
Nope.
And Z is not in jail that we heard about.
Nope.
Is he? I mean,
and it sounds like he's pretty nomadic. That when that he moves, that he moves around a lot. Because it sounded like, because the witness today was from the running into the road incident, where Chloe ran into the road trying to get help, saying that she was being kidnapped, that her and her daughter were being kidnapped. And she was trying to get this neutral woman to help. And because that woman said that Z hit her with her car, with his car, and so she attempted to press charges, but they weren't able to serve him. That was my understanding of her testimony.
Well, we'll take one last question here, and Oh, I moved and lost the question, but I think the question was, and I'm sorry, I've lost who asked it, but the question was, how would you go about persuading the jury one way or the other? And take the position of the defense. You're trying to persuade the jury that she actually is not guilty by reason of insanity. What would you say? And I'll try to find the name of the person who asked it.
I would talk about her meeting him when she was only 16 years old, starting a relationship at 17 years old, which is a really vulnerable time for any person, but specifically somebody that does have mental health conditions, and that the beliefs of this group made things worse for her. And that even her mother said that she didn't look like herself. She was not eating, she was not sleeping. And that even with somebody that doesn't have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, not sleeping can cause anybody to experience psychosis. And I think they'll talk about how much Chloe loved her daughter, and that she didn't understand what she was doing. I think it'll be they'll play off the different testimony, that there was that that delusional compulsion, that she was feeling like everything was telling her to end her own life and her daughter. I think the prosecution will say she just wanted to be free. It wasn't about that. It wasn't that she was psychotic or that she didn't understand that it was wrong. She locked the door. She immediately felt remorse. She regretted doing it. And that Z's the one that's been talking to her, feeding her information. Some interesting testimony happened today that Z might actually have, like, he's been in a mental health hospital, and that he has a diagnosis of might have a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, which because the testimony from the second forensic psychologist called by the defense today, the way that Chloe answered her questions on the MMPI, the results were invalid because she was endorsing everything. And that I think the prosecution will say something to the effect of, she's trying to get away with doing what she did. And that she understood, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she never meant to survive it. And she wanted to punish him. She wanted him to feel her pain. That's what I think the prosecution could say.
It was UA Crimson Tide who asked that question. And I would add this as far as trying to persuade the jury. I would, if there is any fact out there that suggests that it was really Z's idea, or that there was some kind of influence where she believed that the baby would be better off, would be happier, would return in a better form, not evil, not sinful, without the breast milk that she believed was poisoning the child, anything like that, that's what I would be looking for, is something that would suggest that there was in her mind the belief that she wasn't really causing any harm, and that therefore it would. But I'm just saying, if I could find that, that's what I would want, because otherwise you just are always left with no matter what, you go back to, she made this choice.
And so because you said that, and we're backwards, so I point this way. Because you said that, I get why the prosecution asked, did she think her baby was evil? Did she think her baby was against her? Or like and all of the defense experts so far have said no. None of the experts have said that she thought it was temporary, or that they were going to nobody's said that I've heard.
There was suggestion that Z thought the baby was evil, though, right? And the name of the baby.
But I think that was to torment her, to punish, because it was something about sin, and that. So I think, like, if she wasn't listening to him, I think that possibly came from him based on today's testimony. So,
and let me say thank you to Kelly D, who's been a member for 9 months. That's awesome. And Chico Karen, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Also a member for 9 months. And Carrie and Lute's channel. Good to hear from y'all again. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Berry. I really appreciate your coming on, and I've enjoyed your coverage. Would you tell our group some of the places where they can find you? Your
Yes.
YouTube channel, obviously.
So I am on YouTube at Dr. Patrice Berry, and then I also have resources on Instagram and TikTok as well.
Great. Well, we are delighted to have you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and to get to some questions answered on this case. It's a complicated case legally. It's a complicated theory legally. And so it's really useful to have some psychological perspective on it. So thank you so much for that. And so I'll say good night and thank you to Marlon and mamapinks and to denisepelton, who are our mods. I really appreciate what they do. You are about to see, and this, I'm going to break this into 3 parts ultimately, but you're about to see the nearly movie-like video that Marlon has done as our outro to thank the people who were the line sitters for me, enabled me to cover the Delphi trial that we just finished up.